Life is filled with change. I mean, a lot of change. You may not even realize how much it is and how much it permeates all of our life because it just is everywhere. I mean, little things like language changes. Words that meant one thing in the English language in the 1800s don't mean the same thing anymore, like computer. I mean, the language changes. Everything changes. Our economy changes. I mean, prices change and not for the better currently in a really bad way. But everything changes. People change sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. I mean, and you might even be thinking about your own life going, yeah, I've changed and I don't like what's happened. Or maybe you look back at who you were and you're like, whew, I'm so glad that person isn't me anymore. But things change, circumstances of life change, jobs change, friends change, your income changes, your health changes, your hair changes. I mean, it falls out and turns gray. I mean, these things happen. It just is part of life. And this particular season in my life and my wife and I's life, we're going through some changes of like the kids leaving and we're now empty nesters. And that honestly is a pretty significant change, but is very, very cool. We do like that quite a bit. It's a just a reality of life. It's all about change. Solomon said it this way in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1, telling us that life is all about change. This is Solomon telling us this some 3,000 years ago. And then in 1962, the Byrds sang it and told us the same thing. And they say this: there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. That has been one of my key takeaways from my sabbatical over the course of the last 4 months. I have just taken time to pull back and disconnect. And one of the things that I've realized so much in deepening levels is everything is temporary. Everything. Nothing is going to stay the same. Everything we face, everything we wrestle with, everything we celebrate is all going to change. It's all temporary. And if that's a fact, and it is, that no matter what you're experiencing now is temporary. And if that's a fact, then that means change is going to come. We should expect it, but maybe even more than just expect change, we should, well, prepare for it. I once heard it said this way, and I don't remember where the quote came from, but it's pretty solid. It's the assumption for the fool that today's weather will be tomorrow's weather. Right. Seasons will change. And it's the assumption of the fool that today's going to be tomorrow's weather, because you and I know that it won't. I mean, it is foolish to think that now that we're in upstate New York in this season of change, stepping into October and realizing you're going to get your winter coats out. And if you continue to do that and it gets to July and you're still wearing it, people are going to look at you a little strange and realizing that that is not the way you go about things. It's a fool that assumes today's weather will be tomorrow's weather. And we know that weather changes, seasons change. Solomon tells us that this life is filled with change. And if you live like it's not going to change, then that is, well, it's foolish. Now, where it gets tough is where we usually associate negativity with change. And that's not always the case. But why do we do that? Why do we want to resist change or maybe even fear it? Because sometimes change is really, really good. Because the change that comes, you have to understand this. When a change comes into your life, that means something has ended and something else has begun. But when something ends, that is a loss. And when you have a loss, you have to grieve it. And you go through the stages of grief. And oftentimes we don't want to do that. But if we get stuck there and we only look at the negative end of it, then we may miss what is happening in a much larger scale. And we go through changes, but realize that when something ends, you will grieve it. It may be a long period of time or a short period of time, whether it's a loss of a job, where you change jobs, you grieve your old job. Whether it's somebody, you lose a loved one, your life is going to look different after that. You lose a portion of your health, your life is going to look different after that. And that's not always completely unredeemable. There are good that can come out of it. But when something ends, that also means something else is coming. So you have to approach life realizing that it is going to change, expect it, and then prepare for it. And to prepare for it with the right attitude. And how can you do that? How can you come against the change that will come in your life and prepare with it for the right attitude? That we can approach change with the proper perspective of that it's coming, that it can be good, and that it is, well, it's inevitable. How can you do that? Here's the answer. Because God is steady through it all. No matter what change comes into your life, God is steady. Listen to what the psalmist David says in Psalm 18:12. And what I find it really interesting, just a little bit of a sidebar here, the writer of Ecclesiastes is Solomon. This is Solomon's dad, David. Now, Solomon says life's going to change and there's a season for it and it's going to happen. You need to be ready for that. And then his dad says this in Psalm 18:2. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, a stronghold. David states unequivocally that God is his fortress. He is my fortress, my rock, my salvation. Now, when I think about that, I realize that in that verse, there are 30 words in the English language. 7 of them are the word my. That's almost a quarter of the words in that one verse are the word my. I think David's trying to make a point here. He's saying God is my rock, my salvation, my strength. Now, that forces me to ask the question and look in the mirror and say, is that the same for me? See, when change comes in my life, what am I building my life on? What is my strength? David, again, unequivocally says, God is my strength, is my rock. And so we do have to just pause here for a second, look in the mirror, figuratively or maybe literally, and ask, is God my rock and my salvation? Because if not, then you're building your life on something else. And when change comes, it can, well, rock your world, I guess pun is intended there. But if you are building your life on something else, then everything that your life comes out of your life is built on that. Think about it this way. If my life is built on Christ, then all of my decisions are rooted in him. My thoughts are rooted in him. My attitudes are rooted in him. My practices are rooted in him. They've come out of what I'm building my life on. And so this is why it's so important to say, what is my rock? What is my salvation? When change comes, what do I cling to? Where do I turn? Or do I just pretend nothing's ever going to change? I stick my head in the sand, and then that is the assumption of the fool. So what is it that you build your life on? When change comes, when you feel that uncertainty of change, what are you building your life on? Solomon says life's going to change. David says, I build my life on God who is my rock. And then Jesus just doubles down on that. In the parable of the wise and the foolish builder, Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 and 25. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. As Jesus closed up the Sermon on the Mount, those are the words he speaks. You're going to either take these words and build your life on them, or you're not. And if you don't, you're building your life upon sand. And if you build them on the rock, David says, my rock, my salvation, you will hold steady through the storms, through the changes. And I want you to note something about when Jesus tells us about building our house upon the rock or the sand. You do the building when the weather's nice. You do the building, and then he said the storms come. You see, the storms are coming. The change is coming. What will happen is will be revealed what you've built your life upon. And so it is the day in, day out, maybe even mundane things of the choices you make, the perspective you have, what you're building your life on will be revealed when the change comes. And that's essentially what Jesus is saying here about the streams rose and the winds came and the rain came and all of that came. But what were you doing beforehand in preparation for it? Building my house upon the rock. Then it will stand through the change, no matter how difficult the change may be. He will hold you steady through it. So what keeps you steady through the changes of life? Is it Christ, your rock, your stronghold, your fortress? Is it Jesus? Because you have to see our lives, my lives, our church here even is not built on circumstances. It's built on the unchanging reality of Jesus Christ. That is our foundation and must be. Otherwise, changes again will rock your world. So no matter what comes your way and knowing that change is coming, I can stand firm knowing this. It won't change God. It won't change his mission. It won't change the gospel. It won't change the purpose of our church. It won't change the purpose of your life. He's got a mission and a plan for you. And when we orient our life, though, around anything other than Jesus, when change comes, it's probably going to be too much. And you'll be overwhelmed. And you'll turn to something, well, that may not be Christ. But see, the truth is this. God is a steady rock, and when change comes into your life, he'll hold you steady through it. Yes, sure, one thing is ending, but something else is beginning. And he'll hold you steady through whatever you will experience in this life. And something better very well may be coming. Again, how can I know that? Well, I know that from life experience, which, that you say, well, that's not my experience. But I also know that through the combination of life experience and scripture, where they meet in my life, where I've walked through this, where I've chosen in my life to build it on Christ and then watch the changes that come, even the heartbreaking changes that come, and watch what he does in them. It's really quite amazing. Let me go back to what I was sharing with you before about my new change in my life of being empty nesting people with my wife and I. Going back to that change that we've been experiencing, I was thinking about this as my last one left, and I thought to myself, going back to when they were younger, when they were all living in the house, there were 7 of us, 5 children, and my wife and I could have like stuck my claws in and held them together and said, "You can't leave because this is so good, and we love this so much and appreciate this so much." And then it kept going and they kept leaving, but I could have held on to them. And if I held on to them, I would have lost. If I would have resisted that change, I would have lost. You see, because what I've understood is this: every time one left, it broke my heart, broke my heart, broke my heart. Every time. I'm not saying that didn't happen. But what I've also discovered is this: that through every one of those changes, what we have now is better. I have 4 fantastic daughter-in-laws, which I didn't have before. I have now 3 grandchildren, which I didn't have before, and they're really cool too. I mean, it just gave us so much room for better. Sure, those changes were heartbreaking. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they weren't. But when your life is built upon the rock, when you realize that God is much bigger than the change that's coming into your life, then you can discover the blessing that's waiting for you on the other end. You see, when you build your life on people, you will be disappointed because they're people. They can't hold up under the weight of your worship. See, that's how I know from experience. I know Solomon says life's going to change. Got it. And David said, he is my rock. He is my fortress. And Jesus just doubles down on it and says, build your life on the rock or the sand. One's going to stay and one's not going to. But there's one other thing that I need to share with you today, because understanding that change is coming and it will be better, and that is this: what the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Listen carefully. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Now don't miss this. All things include change that you may not even like, change that may rock your world. All things he works for the good. Now, before you just stop there and go, oh, okay, so everything that's happening in my life is working for the good. Almost. Notice what he says. There's a little caveat. When Christ is the center of your world. Hear this verse again. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Those who love him. Those that have built their life around him, those that have built their life on the rock, those that say, he is my rock and my fortress, those that go, yeah, change is coming, but I am trusting in the unchangeable Christ. I have built my life upon him. And when that happens, all things work for the good, for those who love him. So all things are working for the good, through the good, the bad, the difficult, whatever change you may feel or makes you even feel uncertain, understand this: that change is coming. He is our rock. He is our fortress. And when that change comes, it will not destroy your world. Change is coming and change is here. And the concern is this then: have you built your life on the rock? Are you, when the storm is not here yet, building your life on the rock? Is this your attitude? Is this your practice to continue to build your life on Christ? So just take a moment, look in the mirror and ask, what are you building your life on? Because if you're building your life on anything other than Jesus, when the change comes, and it's coming, it will rock your world. Today, choose to put your hope, your faith, and your trust in Christ, so that when the change comes, even though your heart may break, you can discover the good on the other end of it that God has planned for you.